everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Crossroads, the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we're breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. Today, with me in the flesh, I have Brandy, Her Majesty Brooks. She ran a glorious campaign for county council last year. She is an advocate for housing rights. She is an advocate for the disenfranchised and the impoverished in Montgomery County, Maryland. Brandy, I know. I know, but I
I
had
do.
to.
Everybody starts and they say that the H and the M stand for Her Majesty. And while I am a queen, that is not technically what they stand for.
What? Well, we should get it changed then. But Brandy Brooks is here with me today. Thank you so much for joining
It
me.
is such a pleasure to be on the show, Rashida. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, the topic for discussion today is housing. Um, it's a pretty central issue to pretty much everything, and
Yeah, basically,
yeah.
it kind of defines where we all are and, how we get to do pretty much everything. That basis of being housed it's literally the platform upon which we build our lives, and it determines so much about how our lives work. So it's an incredibly important topic. And, we're going to get into this in the show, but underneath that topic, we need to talk about the land. We need to
Yes.
actually talk about land when we talk about housing. And I'm really excited that we're going to really have a chance to have that discussion.
Yeah, so I know that, you gave a so Brandy and I, for everyone who wants to know, Brandy and I are actually friends in real life,
We are.
and we support each other in our work and our efforts. And one of the things that you did recently was a really dynamic event in which you talked about racial equity in Montgomery County in Maryland. And
Yep.
part of that was a very deep dive into the history of housing, which also is the history of land use.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I did as part of the opening to this People's Forum on Racial Equity in Montgomery County was to really break down when we talk about what racial equity is and what we're trying to achieve. It's actually really important for us to understand kind of the state of things right now when it comes to how race has been used, not just in social interactions, but as the basis for public policy. And I think a lot of folks don't really realize, sometimes people will have conversations and they'll say, "Why are we still talking about race? Why do we have to talk about race?" Um, or they'll get really frustrated at things like affirmative action laws that are designed to correct imbalances in access or imbalances in wealth or employment and housing, where you see racial discrimination and racially disparate impacts. And the reason that we are still talking about race is because we've been talking about race in the United States for close to 400 years. Again, not just socially, but as a basis for public policy decisions, particularly around access to land in the United States. And so the summary that I had a chance to do was really going through the history of how, since the 17th century, we have been making different outcomes around criminal justice. We've been doing that since way back in the 1600s. Differing outcomes around access to land and wealth, differing outcomes around citizenship, and up until very, very recently in the history of the United States, those were defined explicitly to the advantage of white people in the United States. And you can't just look at nearly 400 years of history and say, okay, let's just make a level playing field now. That's not how the world works. The accumulated advantages, the concentration of wealth and the concentration of opportunity, and again, the way that that has shaped our geography across the country, especially in cities, we have to contend with that if we are actually going to achieve racial justice and racial equity going forward.
And like, what are getting into land ownership? Like, what are some of the prominent issues regarding land? Like, is there a pathway, an easy pathway to get to land ownership? Can people own the land that their house sits on?
Oh
Like,
my goodness. So, I mean, I think one of the most prominent issues with land is that we actually don't talk about it enough. And this is going to sound strange because, especially in local government, so much of the things that we talk about are land things, planning and zoning and development rights. But we actually don't delve a little bit deeper to understand how folks own land and what the patterns of land ownership are outside of people's individual homes. If folks are thinking about land at all, they're thinking about the plot of land that, if they're lucky, they own,
right,
upon which their house sits. But the patterns of land ownership, you have to kind of take a further step back and really understand what's going on with land and what goes on with land control. So, one of the things that we have to know is about 3/4 of the land in the United States is privately held. So it's in private hands. The other quarter of that land is in public hands, federal government, state and local
parks,
governments, etc. And it
right.
includes parks. It includes a lot of different kind of land. There's actually a
Hmm.
lot of, you can have agricultural land, you can have housing, obviously, that's in the hands of governments, you can have commercial land that's in the hand of governments. So governments own a lot of different kinds of land too.
Right.
But certainly our parks are a big part of that.
Hmm.
And so I want to go back. Let's talk about that history breakdown. One of the things that I ask about when I'm teaching racial equity training courses is I ask folks when they think affirmative action started in the United States. And a lot of people say, like 50s or like 60s, 70s, 80s. That's when you start to see affirmative action laws on the books.
Hmm.
And I like to go back and I like to say, well, actually, affirmative action started in 1705.
Oh,
Yes. And we talk a lot about, one of the things we talk about in the Black community, especially when we were talking about reparations, is this idea of we just want our 40 acres and a mule.
yeah.
And you look back in 1705, Virginia, um, the colony at that time, was the first place where, at the end of the 17th century, in the 1680s and 1690s, they started talking about and defining whiteness so that they could use it
Right.
in order to make laws that excluded people who were not considered white,
Hmm.
which they defined as anyone without Negro or Indian blood, with the exception of Pocahontas' descendants. Do
Oh,
you know
yes,
why?
yes, yes. Because Pocahontas was married to John Smith
John
and
Rolfe.
Rolfe. What? Why is it not? It's not Smith.
No, it's not Smith. I think it's Rolfe.
Whatever.
Anyway,
The white man, and she, because of that, was exempt from this definition of being considered
right.
a
Well,
person
so
of
so
color.
Pocahontas herself, would have still
Lord
been
have
considered
mercy,
Indian, but
Jesus.
her descendants, because they were wealthy landowners in Virginia,
Oh.
the House of Burgesses couldn't pass these laws that excluded non-white people from this stuff without exempting this group of wealthy landowners who would have raised holy heck if I'm trying to be good for the
It's fine.
the public. But if all of a sudden their land rights have been taken. So
Right.
what do we know from that? Again, first, race is this very specific public policy construct used as for exclusion,
Hmm.
for particularly for like economic and legal exclusion, and that already it's constructed in a super arbitrary way based on the interests of the people who were controlling things at the time.
Right.
So all of those things play into how we understand and how race continues to operate today.
Hmm.
But back to the 40 acres and a mule.
Yes.
So about 15 years after the House of Burgesses defines whiteness so
Hmm.
that they can start to use it as a tool, Virginia law is passed that requires masters to provide white indentured servants with 50 acres of land, 30 shillings, a musket, and 10 bushels of corn.
What?
Yep. So after indentured servants, whose servitude often lasted about 7 years, a law was passed that required their masters to give them 50 acres of land and the money and resources with which to start planting it.
So, all right, let me stop you right there.
Yep.
Let me stop you right there.
Hmm. It's gonna get worse, by the way.
Oh, so because like the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that you'll do this for indentured servants,
Mhm.
which in essence are what prisoners are, and so to speak, because they have jobs, they can get jobs, but
Mhm.
the wages that they're paid are peanuts. And they were at least given something that so that they could start their lives properly, realizing that being an indentured servant meant that they were not having the same levels of access they needed to have a successful future.
Right.
Am I right? Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's
So,
just wanted
and
to.
and now, of course, one of the differences there is that indentured servants weren't considered quote criminals.
Mm.
Oh, and the girl, we could have a whole
Oh,
unpacking
yes, we
of the
could.
definition of crime. There's actually some amazing work that prison abolitionists do around the difference between crime, things that are legal, and things that are actually harmful. And
Ooh.
it's like they do this little Venn diagram to help people understand that not all the things that we criminalize are either harmful or illegal.
Right.
Not all the things that are actually harmful do we either criminalize or make illegal. And
Hmm.
not all things that are illegal do we either consider crimes or are actual harms. And I want to talk about that last part because, for instance, when you talk about the folks who took down our economy in 2008, 2007, 2008, and stole homes from under the feet of so many people in the United States and then got a big payback for it.
Yes.
Those folks committed illegal acts, but they're not considered criminals in the same way that someone who gets caught with an ounce on them gets considered a criminal and has their life and liberty taken away. So, we need to understand that this is a
Yes.
separate topic. That the whole construction of crime is also a construction.
Yes.
And it's a racialized and a gendered construction about who's victims, who's criminals, who's the protectors. Craziness.
Yes.
But so indentured servants weren't considered criminals. Now, by this time in 1705, there had already been a whole bunch of stuff that the House of Burgesses and that Virginia law had done to, again, provide different penalties for people of African descent who were enslaved in the Americas, to provide different penalties for what happened when they ran away, and
Hmm.
also to make slavery hereditary. So, again, folks who frequently worked side by side in the plantation system using race as a tool to destroy class solidarity,
Hmm.
and then to create very, very different outcomes very early on in terms of who could even get free. And then with this law in 1705, what they got. And as you said, there was a recognition that if you've labored under somebody else for all these years, that if you just get released, you don't have anything to start your life with. So
Right.
there was a mandate that said, okay, we've got to give you 50 acres, a bag of money,
It's ridiculous.
and arms,
Goddamn musket. I
yeah,
just.
and corn.
Oh, corn.
So that's where we're starting this off. And again, one of the things we have to know, there are folks who don't like to talk about this, who don't like to delve into American history and actually understand it this way. But the creation of the United States, the political entity, has always been about who gets to take control of the land and from whom. Started with who gets the land here, who gets to decide in the mid Atlantic and New England that the folks, indigenous people, Native Americans who were on the land, weren't doing it right in terms of land cultivation, so that they had the right to take that from them,
Hmm.
that they had the right to enslave them, that they had the right to murder them in order to take possession of that land and to use it and cultivate it in the ways that they wanted to.
Hmm.
So that's the establishment of all. That's the establishment of America, basically. So
This is
let's just put
America.
that out right out there. That's
Yeah.
how America was formed, over and over and over again. You see this in the original colonies. You see this as land continues to extend through the Louisiana Purchase. You see this as land continues to extend out west. So, for instance, you look at um, the Mexican-American War. Now, skipping ahead to the 1800s, this is the mid-19th century. A war was fought between Mexico and the U.S. over
Mm-hmm.
control of land, Texas, and a whole bunch of other territories. And you see the United States winning that war and making a treaty called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo,
Mm-hmm.
which was designed to set out the terms, particularly of how these folks who had a border jump over them overnight without their consent. So
Whew!
they became U.S. residents without their consent, and there was this treaty that was supposed to say, okay, this is how you're going to get treated. And it was supposed to protect Mexican land rights.
Mm-hmm.
Problem was, Congress added a little
Little
doodad.
zhuzh.
Yeah. And basically they said, okay, sure, we'll protect your land rights. You just have to prove title in U.S. courts.
Oh my God.
Well, all these folks,
Oh my
they hadn't been
God.
living under U.S.
Oh
courts.
my
They hadn't
God.
been living under U.S. documentation standards. The U.S. could define whatever it wanted to about what they needed to produce to prove that they had title. And since most of them didn't have it, this was the premise for stealing land from all of these Mexicans and then handing it over to white settlers. So that's one of the ways that, quote, the West was won.
That should be the title of this. That actually should be the title, how the West was won in quotation marks. But like,
Yeah.
so when I'm sure you're gonna keep getting into this, but just to kind
Yeah,
of,
just remember, we're still in the 19th
yeah, like
century.
we're not even there yet. So it's like I want to ask you, how has land ownership been used to like influence housing policy? And I don't think we
Well,
got we got
well,
to put a pin in that,
we're
don't
going
we?
to put a pin in that, but we're going to get there
All
because
right.
as we go through this, we're about to get into housing.
Oh,
Now,
mercy,
again,
Jesus.
actually, bear in mind all of this land ownership. Like, this isn't people just like popping up farms and then walking away to wherever else their house is. This is all people's homes.
Right.
This is the source of their family wealth. This is like these are their homes. This is how they produce food for themselves. This is their economic. This is their livelihood. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's how this is happening.
Right.
And this whole image that we have of folks settling
Oregon Trail
Oregon Trail,
and
like all of
yeah.
this stuff. And again, we know that there were different kinds of trails that happened
Oh yes.
across the U.S. And not all of them were fun-covered
Positive.
wagons.
No.
We have things like the Trail of Tears,
Hmm.
where again, in order to seize control of land that Native Americans still were occupying, despite the threat of the white people around them, they were forcibly removed and forced from rich, lush land of the East Coast out to this is the start of the reservation system.
Yep.
We're gonna move you all. We're gonna quote put you in a good place.
What the
Desert.
fuck does
None
that
of this
even mean?
that doesn't mean it. It doesn't really mean anything. Put them sort of in unwanted land that white settlers hadn't already claimed, and move them over there so that folks in the East could take over their land in the East. You see that's especially like Georgia is one of like Georgia, South Carolina. These are the big places for where that was happening. Um, and the hits just keep on coming when we talk about land.
I don't know if I can
So
take anymore.
it's actually so I want to pause and I want to name that. When I first started going through this history, and someone when I got to go through this history of walking and training that was even more detailed than what we're talking about right now, it felt like I had been punched.
Yeah.
Because when you see how naked the dispossession is, when you see how stark it is, and when you realize that how much it is set the stage for, and how much was just straight up stolen from people.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I can't even. I don't even have full words for the feeling that comes with this. So let's talk about the next hit. This is going to be a
Oh.
series of sucker punches.
All right. Gird your loins.
1862, the Homestead Act.
Oh
So now, okay, so let's 1862. Let's note when this is. It's like the middle of the Civil War.
God. Mm-hmm.
But we're still trying to settle the West in the middle of having this like terrible war.
Yes.
So the Homestead Act. You thought 50 acres was bonus? Homestead Act gives up to 160 acres of lands formerly held by Native Americans to white residents who will pay $1.25 and cultivate it for 5 years.
Brandy, I'm gonna shut the podcast off and I'm going home. I don't have time for this. What?
So now I just want folks to know we understand that inflation happens, and $1.25 today is not what the same value that $1.25 had in the 1860s.
Sure.
Rashida, that was 160 acres for less than $40
I told you
in
I'm going to leave.
2019.
I'm going to go home now. Oh my god.
So mind you, again, about a decade after this, the U.S. is having fights about whether or not it should give slaves who've been working for others for hundreds of years any sort of restitution, any sort of setting up of their lives after emancipation. But we're giving away land to white settlers for $40. And I want you to understand, do you know when the last grant under the Homestead Act was given?
When?
1988.
So cause I'm troubled because I feel like I'm hallucinating. So what you're telling me, what I think I hear you saying is that in 1988, a white person could write a check, I assume for $40.
So I don't know. I don't know what the inflationary rate was at that time for settling. But again, there were still grants of formerly Native American held land being given to white people under this kind of promise.
Wow.
And ultimately, over 85 million acres of land was disposed over the life of the Homestead Act.
Oh
So
my god.
you're going to have to get ready for some more.
Okay. All right. All right.
So despite all of this, there were places where Black people were still figuring out how to build communities, figuring out how to make their lives. And this was when I first went through the National Museum of African American History and Culture, this was the place where I actually had to stop the first time because I couldn't
Deal.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
Because, so, you had all these things where white folks were like, we don't want you here. Jim Crow laws were firmly established by that point. So Black people were like, fine, we're going to go and set up somewhere else. And the problem was, when folks saw that we could set up somewhere and thrive, they couldn't stand it. And so you have a series in the late 19th century and the early 20th century of community massacres.
Yeah.
One of the most famous being in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was considered the Black Wall Street for the size of the community and the buildup of like Black prosperity that had happened in Tulsa. And in June 1921, white residents of Tulsa came in, murdered people, and burned that area to the ground.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you bring that up because I don't know if you've watched the first premiere episode of Watchmen that came out.
I heard that was
Oh,
featured in
they
that
went
episode.
right into it. They
Yeah.
actually just showed that very vividly what was happening
Yeah.
in Oklahoma at that time.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting the reactions on social media of white people who had no idea.
Mhm.
And that to me is just part and parcel with privilege, is that
Right.
you don't actually have to be aware of the atrocities that
Mhm.
your people committed,
Right.
because why would you if it only serves to continue to perpetuate your feelings and sense that you are superior to others.
Right. And the thing is, Tulsa might be the biggest and most egregious example that we know about, but there were scores of these.
Oh yeah.
All across the South. And
Rosewood,
Florida, another one. Again, these communities where folks were, if they were lucky, they just got run out of town. If
Yeah.
they were
If they were
lucky, they
lucky.
just got dispossessed of their land and all that they had built.
Right. If they were lucky.
Those were the survivors. And no, by the way, there was no compensation for if your town and your business and your whole life got burnt down in a race riot.
Hell no.
And one of the things that we don't talk about, there's this amazing book by Isabel Wilkerson called "The Warmth of Other Suns"
Yes.
that documents the largest internal migration in U.S. history, which is not taught in any history curriculum, to my knowledge, which was the movement of, I think ultimately it was 6 million African Americans, but it was like 90%. This massive population shift where before like 1910, I think it was 90% of African Americans lived in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the Great Migration in 1970, and I'm going to forget the exact statistic, but that had almost flipped,
Mm-hmm.
where all of those folks had fled to northern and western destinations.
Yes.
And a major factor was one, just ongoing structural discrimination through Jim Crow laws, but also people fleeing the kind of violence that you saw in Tulsa and Rosewood, or the threat of that violence if they were agitating anyway. People fleeing lynching culture.
Yes.
Which again, if folks have not been to the lynching museum in Montgomery, Alabama, that was created by the Equal Justice
Yes.
Initiative, you absolutely must go. You've got to go to the Legacy Museum too. Both of these tremendous, tremendous, and powerful places to learn about the history of just brutal, brutal racist violence
Yes.
in the United States, and taking that all the way now to our current legacy around mass incarceration.
Yes.
Um, so I want to put that interlude in there because we have to understand that even without benefiting from all this structural stuff, Black people and other people of color, which I'll get to in a minute, were figuring out how to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they did, the policy was, how do we destroy these people's lives and take their land? And I want to talk about a couple of other instances of how this keeps going for other groups beyond Black people. So in the 1930s, there was this program. There were these programs. One of them was called the Bracero program, which was to bring Mexican farm workers here. This should sound familiar,
Mm-hmm.
to work on U.S. agricultural land. You saw, in the late 1900s, huge waves of Asian immigrants coming to help build the railroad infrastructure, particularly Chinese immigrants that actually made the West more accessible. So these immigrants would come, they'd work on these systems, they'd help to build the United States. And then when they got too numerous, when they started getting too prosperous, people freaked out. So the first freak out you see actually in 1882,
Mm-hmm.
the Chinese Exclusion Act
Yes.
are the first place where we have immigration exclusion by race explicitly,
Mm-hmm.
barring Chinese immigration, because all of a sudden, after asking folks to come and build our railroads,
No, we need you to get out.
white people were like, no,
That's
we
enough.
cannot be here. So keeping them from coming in. But then you also have the points where when folks are already here, we're like, no, we actually just we got to get you out of here. And that was what started happening in the 1930s, with residents of Mexican descent who were forcibly deported out of the United States. I think close to 1 million people were forcibly deported, 60% of whom were U.S. citizens who were forcibly deported to Mexico.
Wow.
And a big reason for this was so that you wouldn't have to include them in the benefits of New Deal legislation around labor
Mm.
protections, around, all these giveaways to businesses to help build the infrastructure that resulted from the New Deal.
So quick.
I just want to note, hold
All
on.
right,
There's, there's,
go.
there's one more thing that I
All right.
want to note.
Yeah.
I also want to note in the 1940s, this has to be mentioned, Japanese internment.
Yes.
So, 1942 to 1946, the forcible removal of, I believe it was 120,000 people of Japanese descent, again, the vast majority of whom were U.S. citizens, to concentration camps in the United States and off of their homes and their land, the businesses that they had built, the communities that they had built, because of some threat that they supposedly posed. So, this is how we do people of color around land. And this is why, if we're going to talk about housing, if we're going to talk about economic equality, if we're going to talk about justice in any way, we have to be talking about land. Because we have been doing this for centuries.
Yeah.
And it is the foundation of how the United States works.
So, as what I wanted to ask, because I'm percolating, I'm like a
Mm-hmm.
lava lamp. Um, was there's actually, interestingly enough, in Ta-Nehisi Coates's collection of articles that he wrote for the Atlantic, We Were 8 Years in Power. There's one in particular where he goes into housing, and I will provide like the link for
Mm-hmm.
everybody so they can check it out. But I remember like the way that you said that you felt when you were at your training and you learned about the history of like land ownership and housing and policy was kind of the same reaction that I felt when I read in Coates's essay
Mm-hmm.
that we as Black folks were completely excluded from the New Deal, particularly
Mm-hmm.
with housing, which we identify a lot of that with redlining, but
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't it. That wasn't the only way that we were excluded. It was also with predatory lending
Mm-hmm.
and not being allowed or permitted to own homes
Mm-hmm.
and thinking that we were, but not being able to actually have true ownership
Mm-hmm.
because of not fully understanding what the language was, so that we're signing up for these deals where it seems like it's okay, but we're actually paying a lot more interest in what the house is worth. And,
Mm-hmm.
just, and obviously redlining, which we are all very aware of,
Mm-hmm.
at least hopefully, of redlining and the detriments of it. So like I just wanted to say that
Yep.
because it's just we're talking about people of color, and obviously that's really who the focus and the audience of this podcast is,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to just I had to bring that up. I just wanted to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it's this structural exclusion. Again, even the crafting of labor laws that were part of the New Deal, specifically excluding um, domestic workers and agricultural workers, the ramifications of what we're still dealing with in terms of domestic workers and agricultural workers often not having access to minimum wage benefits, not having access to any other kind of benefits, struggling to be able to unionize or protect their tons and tons of abuses
Right.
that go on in domestic work and in the food sector. Again, a legacy of these New Deal programs, specifically excluding large groups of people of color and continuing to do so throughout the entirety of the 20th century and into the 21st. Um, and then, yeah, you brought up uh, redlining. You brought up the homeowners loan corporation, the Federal Housing Act, again structured to codify in public policy. This isn't, and I want folks to get this. This is not like people's preference for not lending to folks. This is two federal agencies saying we're gonna aid and abet and direct discrimination in housing and in lending. And again, as you know, people like redlining is getting a lot more play. People are seeing it. There's exhibits traveling around the country. This is a critical part of those maps that basically said in the places where there were more people of color and especially more Black people, they were, less favorable. They were colored red on those maps. You
Hmm.
shouldn't lend there for anything.
Yep.
And so let's go back to what I was talking about Isabel Wilkerson's book and the Great Migration.
Hmm.
So again, you've had this massive migration of folks trying to flee the South, where they were getting targeted, fleeing to northern cities. Um, and then you have them, even as they come into northern cities, being confined into ghettos,
Hmm.
being restricted into very, very limited geographic territory where they were allowed to rent or to purchase homes.
Right.
Then you have that being reinforced by things like redlining, by things like predatory lending.
Yes.
Then you get into the GI Bill. The GI Bill, 1940s and 50s, $95 billion in education and in housing benefits go to returning soldiers, overwhelmingly to white returning soldiers and their families.
I'm going home.
And this is now considered the biggest transfer of advantage to white families in U.S. history. Now, mind you, we've already had massive transfers of advantages. There was the 50 acres and the shillings and the musket and the corn. There was the 160 acres for $40. And then you get the GI Bill, which blows all of that out of the water for millions and millions
Brandy, I don't need to go
of white
outside and get
families.
arrested because I slap a white person. I don't need this today.
Rashida, I hear you. I hear
Okay.
you because I mean, again, the anger. Like there are ways that I try and talk about this with humor and sarcasm,
That's what I'm trying to
but
do.
it's a way of coping with real deep anger about the deep structure of this. And again, this bill particularly around housing. So the American suburbs as we know them today, so much of Montgomery County
You better come on now.
as we know it today was built through these policies. And when you add in racially restrictive covenants, which were actively used in numerous communities across our county and across the country, the thing that we say about how your zip code can be used to predict your socioeconomic outcomes and how that's strongly racially correlated,
Mm-hmm.
this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
It comes from restricting every opportunity for Black people and other people of color to build wealth. It comes from dispossessing people of their land over and over and over again. It comes from robbing people of like proper compensation for their labor over and over and over again. It comes from concentrating the poverty of people of color. You know, the majority of poor people in the United States are white,
Yes.
but they're not concentrated. So white poverty looks
Mm.
incredibly different. There are some pockets of concentrated white poverty, but the vast majority of poorer white people in the United States live in more mixed income communities and areas. Whereas Black poverty is concentrated because we've been geographically concentrated through the control of land. And then you see how, again, when you restrict commercial investment, when you fuel white flight,
Mm-hmm.
when you create entire cities that are now red lines,
Yep.
when you gut the places where people of color live of so many resources, and then those places fall into disrepair, and then we start to associate people of color with disrepair. And we
You better
say
come on
that
now.
it's the fault of the people of color who live there that they don't want to take care of their stuff. And we say it's the fault of the people of color who live there that they aren't working. Mind you, we took all the darn jobs.
Because we didn't even talk about that piece.
No, we haven't. Like again,
I didn't
we
even
could
talk
have
about
like
that
seven
bit.
other conversations building off of this conversation.
Yeah.
We took all the amenities, we took all the services, and then you wonder why folks are unemployed, why folks are moving into, and I'm not even going to talk about drugs in inner cities and what was done to Black and brown communities
We
because we don't have time, and I also don't need to
get,
get arrested tonight.
yeah, no.
Um, and then you talk about like the lack of transportation. You talk about how that factors in. You talk about the lack of good food in
Yes.
cities. So the lack of businesses investing in food,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of transportation services or transportation services in disrepair. You talk about how long separate but equal was allowed to persist, and that there
Yes.
are right now, Rashida, people who are fighting in Howard County, just over the border, to resegregate schools.
Um, yes. Because that came up at our table
Yep.
because there was a woman there from Howard County
Hmm.
who literally said that they're
They
redistricting.
are trying to redistrict so that they can create like 80, 90% white school districts and carve them out,
Lord have mercy.
which is actually very easy because racial residential segregation created through all these things that we're talking about means that most of us live very segregated lives. And in our daily walk around our homes and our neighborhoods, we will mostly see other people of our skin color. You and I, we're here in Tacoma Park where I live.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to live in the historic downtown of Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park is reputed as one of the most progressive cities and the most progressive county in Maryland.
Girl, if I roll my eyes any harder, I'm gonna go blind. Keep going.
I used to live in Wheaton,
Mm-hmm.
in Silver Spring. It has been a painful shock to come and live in a city that is as segregated as Tacoma Park, as segregated in terms of housing, as segregated in terms of access to amenities, as
Yes.
segregated in terms of transportation, as segregated economically, and all of that correlates to race.
Yes, it does. Because what in Tacoma Park, for those who are not familiar with the area, it's often boasted as it's called the Berkeley of the East
Right, the People's
Coast, and
Republic of Tacoma Park.
Azalea City. But when you think about the fact that you have to be within the municipal district of Tacoma Park in order to be able to join their library for free, and if you do not, that there is some bum high ridiculous crazy fee in order to be able to join, meaning that if you don't have that kind of disposable income, you're not going to join. The fact that there are buses, there's transportation, but is it accessible to everybody?
Mhm.
If we are having any kind of organizing or community action, is there a central location where we can meet so that the folks who don't or who do not have cars and rely on public transportation may not have to go that far, or don't can walk, or is it accessible so that folks who may want to participate can?
Mhm.
And would they, after 6 o'clock, if there's no public transportation going and they have kids to take care of and so on and so forth?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like it
And again, these are the legacies of how you build structures and patterns of land ownership and control, and then all these outcomes follow.
Yeah.
So, going back to the topic that we started with, the topic of housing, and speaking in at Tacoma Park, there are tremendous issues around rental housing in Tacoma Park.
Come on.
And the mayor and the county council just recently passed like a new housing and economic development policy, where they really want to push at delving into these issues and working on them here in the city, and I commend them for that. If we are not talking about the fundamentals of who owns and controls land in the city of Tacoma Park, everything else that we do is for show.
Yes.
And that's not because of a lack of good intentions. That's because we're not dealing with the reality of what drives housing insecurity and economic insecurity. So, for instance, you take the area that's called Tacoma Langley Crossroads, Langley Park,
Hmm.
kind of at the northern end of Tacoma Park. And, I hate to say this about a transit infrastructure, which should be a good thing, but that area is threatened by the development of the Purple Line.
Yes, it is.
And trust me, folks who live there, as much as they would like to welcome transit infrastructure, they recognize that it is a threat
It is an absolute
to
threat.
their housing and their livelihoods. And there is no clear plan about what is going to be done. One, to like improve the conditions, the deplorable conditions
Hmm.
that you see in rental housing and apartment complexes in Tacoma Park and all across Montgomery County.
I
It
mean,
is, people who are living with mold,
yep.
who are living with vermin, who are living with snakes.
What? Oh, all right.
These are no, these are real things that residents in Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, Gaithersburg, like all these other places are reporting are actually going on in their housing units and not being attended to by management.
I mean,
I wish I were joking.
I know you're not. And the thing that I was going to interject and say is, there was an explosion, like a
Yeah.
full ass explosion, a gas explosion in a one of the buildings
Hmm.
that is, I believe, what is that street? That's I'm terrible with
It's
street
right. It's
names.
right off of Flower and Piney Branch,
Yes.
the Flower Branch Apartments.
And the thing is about this that obviously bothered me and I think bothered everybody is that the residents have been complaining about this
Yes.
for a long damn time.
Yes.
And no one did a thing about it until there was the explosion. And what we all know, what is very clear from the history that we've covered so far,
Hmm.
and where we're going to end up going,
Hmm.
is that this would never have happened in Bethesda. This would have never happened in the municipal district of Tacoma Park
No.
or even downtown Silver Spring.
Nope.
Period.
Nope. And again, if you go back to ownership, and if you were to dig into who actually owns these properties,
Yes.
that ownership, like most of land ownership across the United States, is concentrated into the hands of a very few people. Well, in the hands of a very few real estate companies,
Mm-hmm.
should be noted. And then those are almost exclusively white. And so you have this large group of people of color living on land, building their businesses on land
Mm-hmm.
that they don't own,
Yes.
that they have been kept out of the resources to own. And then you have this transit project, which represents billions of dollars of investment, billions of dollars of economic opportunity, development opportunity, and the inevitable result, if we do not change structures of land ownership, is that the amazing Latino entrepreneurial community and residential community, amazing communities of African American residents, like so many different communities, is going to be completely displaced.
And we've already seen examples of that. And in some of the other conversations that I've had, particularly involving Los Angeles, that's that stuff's already happened.
Hmm.
There's a reason that there is no metro in Beverly Hills. There's a reason that it was built to cut through black communities and
Hmm.
black neighborhoods and what actually resulted from that.
Yeah.
And what I'm imagining with this purple line is what happens in many areas where there's transit development
Hmm.
is that there's also housing and transit development mixed together
Hmm.
with astronomical prices
Hmm.
for rent or ownership,
Hmm.
which disenfranchises those who do not have that kind of economic power.
Right. And the reason that people are making those investments is that they are expecting wealthier and whiter residents to move in.
Yes.
And so that is when it is considered appropriate to invest transit
Mm-hmm.
dollars to maintain your buildings better,
Yes.
to bring better public amenities, to bring better, to bring more and different kinds of shops.
Yeah. For
Although
lower.
actually, I want to name
Come on.
in Tacoma Langley Park, there's a ton.
There's
There's a
a
huge. It is one
ton.
of this enormous centers
Yes.
of economic activity in our county, just like Wheaton, where I used to live, so many immigrant businesses.
Hmm.
But that's not considered the kind of economic development that we really want to invest in and support because, as throughout American history, that's the kind of economic development and thriving that we take from people.
And when you're talking, so we touched on in the chronology, we also were coming up to talking about public housing or
Right.
urban ghettos. What else? What are some historically? How did that look? What was some of the policies around that? And like we touched on that, but just wanted to get it a little bit more in depth into that.
Sure. Well, I mean, again, I think so much of the policy that you see that created that. So, oh gosh, I mean, you have the combination of sort of redlining and housing and lending. You also have the urban renewal push,
Ooh.
which especially you see in cities. You have the highway push,
Mm-hmm.
which I want to name, which like was like here, let's drive a massive, not only structure that would physically divide communities, but also that would pollute communities
Yes.
and create tremendous environmental justice issues near highways
Yes.
that would you have all these policies around infrastructure that cut people off from access to water
Mm-hmm.
even if they live right close to water. Um, so this is I mean this is and then you combine that with the white supremacist ideology that underpins all of this. And like, so you lay all of that legal structure and physical infrastructure, and then you let people's actual racial prejudice play out. And that's how you create a ghetto. And you maintain it for a real long time. And I want to, okay, this is the other thing I want to know is that wealth or the lack thereof is structural and generational.
Say it again.
Wealth or the lack thereof is structural and generational. And I, I want to talk about uh, uh, some personal stories here because when folks will talk about the home that they grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to note what a privilege it is that is racially and class linked to have a home that you grew up in,
Yes.
a single home, a place that you can return to, where your family's history is based. I was at a workshop earlier this year where they're talking about housing justice.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they asked in the workshop was like to list the number of places that you've lived. And I never thought about it very much. Like I knew we moved kind of a bunch as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
but I realized that I had, just in my childhood, I think like around 10 different homes between the time I was a baby and the time I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
And that honestly, most of that was in the final 10 years because my first 8 years we lived in the house that I was born in Massachusetts before we moved down here to the DC metro area. And when I remember going to college and people would talk about the home that they grew up in, and that was such a strange concept to me because I didn't have it. And it is not uncommon for Black and Brown people and for poor people not to have the home that we grew up in. Again, sometimes if we're fortunate, our families have been able to retain our land and their homes.
Right.
But then you come to cases like DC, which was once considered Chocolate City, and was a place where actually you can find people who were multi generational Washingtonians. And now you have this plan that's been concocted since the early 90s to remake DC into the
Butternut
gentrified,
squash city.
yeah, into
Almond
the,
latte city. All right, I'm done. Keep going.
yeah. And you see people who have generations of history in the city who've been displaced economically, who've been displaced again. People who were actually able to ride out things like the 1968 riots
Yes.
and were still able to build and are now being forced out, not by that, but by the fact that their elected officials created a plan not to invest in them, but to say we need different, better. And I put air quotes around the better. So my mom is native Washingtonian,
Mm-hmm.
and my aunt does still live in the house that their parents purchased after scrambling and working, and my grandfather working um, 2 and 3 jobs so that they could buy and maintain this house. So that's been in my family for 2 generations
Wow.
now. But so I've been coming to DC all my life, and I remember shortly after I moved back to this area, the Washington Post article that announced that DC was no longer a majority Black city.
I remember that.
And I thought I was going to cry because there are people who will ask what's wrong with it. What does it matter? And I will ask them, what would it matter if all of your neighbors and your history of being in a place got erased in a place that your family had been for generations? Would that matter to you? And if it matters to you, it matters to all the other folks who've been forcibly removed over over again in our nation's history from the things that we've built. And sometimes it really does feel like too much, you know. Um, I do believe that there are policies that we can fight for. I'm a firm believer in things like cooperative ownership and really restructuring the way that we own not only housing but commercial land, the way that we own land in general,
Right.
to put it under public ownership that is really run by representative groups in community, and community ownership, especially as a tool for reparations.
Yes. Yeah,
Reparations.
we need it and
It is
deserve
about
it.
time that our communities got some 40 acres
And a goddamn mule.
and some mules. So
Probably 2 mules.
it's, a musket and a basket of corn. But
Damn it, I want a 9 mil and my groceries from Whole Foods. What is the problem?
um, but I also think we have to contend. In order to motivate us, honestly, Rashida, to fight this, I think we have to contend with what we have lost.
Yeah.
And really reckon with it. And this is a hard thing for those of us in the communities of color who want to be upwardly mobile, who want to succeed. And we know that this system will reward us better if we keep silent, if we assimilate, if we stay in the groove, if we do not make waves. But I am sorry, we have lost too much.
Yeah.
We have lost too much. We keep losing. We keep having stuff taken from us, and I am done. And that is why I do the work that I do. Everything from renters' rights to really trying to re-envision how we do land ownership. Because if we don't do that, I'm sorry, I do not want to write another 100 years of theft and loss into the history of this country. This is my country.
Yeah.
My ancestors built that.
Yes, we did.
All of that around here.
Yep.
And it is time that we were properly valued and compensated for all that we have put into this country, and that we are properly restored and healed for all that has been stolen.
So we have more than come to the crossroads, which is where we bring all of these multiple components together.
Mm-hmm.
But from this point, I really want to know, what does a just transition, and for those who are not familiar with that term, just transition is a fair and equitable methodology for moving from one existing social program, for instance, housing, or another example could be coal mines. What does that look
Mm-hmm.
like as far as just transition? It is basically moving from one unsustainable program into
Mm-hmm.
a more sustainable one.
Right.
So how do we do that? What does the just transition look like for public housing? What does it look like for land ownership? How can we do that?
Right. So a couple of things I want to highlight. One, there's been this evolving conversation around social housing that's been
Mm,
happening here in Montgomery County and other places, and this actually starts with the idea of what public housing, at least when public housing was done for white people, what it was intended to be.
yep.
But the idea was that there wasn't supposed to be any shame for public housing; that it was actually supposed to be this really awesome upgrade to housing for folks who didn't have access to good housing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you see this in different places all over the world where forms of social housing um, don't come with a sense of oh, this is the crap place where people live, but where it's actually you're creating really beautiful communities for a wide variety of folks, communities that anyone would want to live in.
Right.
But because they're publicly owned and there are different controls around and different like opportunities offered for folks at different economic levels,
Mm-hmm.
then everybody can actually take advantage of this amazing housing. But again, publicly controlled. So it is not the speculative housing market that we keep trying to like tweak to see
Yeah.
if it will produce housing justice.
Right.
The speculative housing market will never produce housing justice.
Period.
Full stop. Done. Not going to do it.
Yeah.
So let's all like
Get off that
recognize
shit.
that and then talk about what are the actual strategies to produce just housing. So that's one. Another that I think is so critically important, we need a housing first strategy toward homelessness. I was feeling so angry about this. So I was up in Baltimore. And Baltimore, so many people in Baltimore are deeply struggling with homelessness.
Yeah.
And I think about how people talk about Baltimore and how people talk about folks who are homeless in Baltimore. And there's like, we talk about it from this public safety angle or this like public nuisance angle. It's a housing issue.
It is
if
a
you
housing
want to
issue.
solve homelessness, house people.
Yeah.
Duh.
Stop putting stakes on benches or putting armrests in the center of a bench because you don't want someone to sleep there.
The amount of money that we pour into criminalizing homelessness
instead
of solving it, and Utah, in Utah of all places,
where the Mormons at?
They've actually started instituting housing first policy, and as has been discovered in every other place that's instituted housing first policy, it is much cheaper to house people in supportive housing with supportive services than it is to incarcerate them and to treat all the medical stuff that goes along with people not having homes. It's so much cheaper.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is not a question of resources. This is not a question of we don't have the resources to solve homelessness. It's that we don't feel like solving homelessness.
Right.
And we would rather pour resources into criminalizing homeless people. So many people who are dealing with substance abuse and mental health issues. And waste. It's like setting our public money on fire.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that we need to really be working on when it comes to housing policy. Another critical one, so you're talking about just transition. There are folks who are going to be starting to work on Green New Deal policy, and folks are already starting to push for this.
Yes.
Here in Montgomery County and other places across the country. And that has to include, one, an understanding that environmental justice isn't just like parks, isn't just land conservation, isn't just waste management.
Yes.
It is housing. It is transportation. It is economic development. It is education. It is all that stuff. And so underpinning all of those things, if we don't work on land justice and really actually figuring out how we are bringing land back under public and community control, instead of investing in development deals that put wealth in the pockets of other people and take it out of our communities.
Yes.
If we do not build a Green New Deal on land justice, it will not be just. And there's something I want to name as we're talking about a Green New Deal. I need us to also remember what the old New Deal did.
Come on now.
So it's fine if folks want to use this term, but if you're going to pretend it's sustainable, you are going to have to intentionally correct the injustices that we are still living with from the last New Deal.
Yes.
Which means you are going to have to intentionally direct resources so that all the communities of color that were excluded from the billions of dollars in infrastructure investment contracts. And I want to know, one of these things, so you got me going.
Come on now, go for it.
One of these things people talk about, well, you can't give contracts to people who don't have the experience, blah, blah, blah.
The fuck you can't?
Bull honky.
Oh,
I'm being nice. I'm being nice for the audience.
Okay.
All these companies that got contracts to build dams, to build highways, to build all that stuff, nobody knew how to do that stuff.
No.
The federal government handed them money, said, figure it out. And then they figured it out. And now those companies like Bechtel, are multi-billion-dollar companies because they got to build their experience with federal dollars. So you know what? If people are serious about economic development and they're serious about racial justice and they're serious about a truly sustainable New Deal, then you'd better be supporting a whole bunch of businesses led by people of color
Yes.
with government dollars.
Yes.
Real government dollars. I'm not talking about play government. I'm not talking about play grants.
Mm-hmm.
I am talking about real substantive contracts that allow them to build the capacity that they have been kept from building, and then allow them to go and perform and build the expertise and build the places where you were bringing in all this infrastructure.
Because really what you're talking about when you say that is a social issue that we're aware of, which is imposter syndrome. Is the sense or the idea that we are somehow not good enough because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the experience or we don't have the language to be understood in
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote palatable way.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Because these companies were just given that money. They didn't have to work for it. They didn't have to prove anything. They
No.
showed up, they got it, and they figured it out, whatever
Right.
that's supposed to look like.
Absolutely. And the idea that we don't have the capacity as people of color to do that, that's racism.
Yes.
That's some racist shit right there.
Oh my goodness gracious.
I did it. I said it. I could. You know what? I've been really good for like an hour
You've
here.
been
I've been
really
so
good.
good.
I have not. This is my show, and I can say what I like.
So, yeah, like that's the standard for a true Green New Deal. And as a community, as communities all over this country, particularly as communities of color, we need to organize and say, and communities of folks who consider themselves white allies, we need to organize to say, this is the standard. Anything less than that doesn't cut it, doesn't get to call itself a Green New Deal, doesn't get our backing, and we will shut it down until it is actually just.
Brandy, because you got me wanting to go pick it.
Good,
You
good.
got me
This
wanting to pick it.
just you know, my radical roots. I'm a member of the DSA. I'm a member of Progressive Maryland. I'm a member of all these progressive groups, and we don't mind doing some direct action. So I'll just name like this system continues to run because we remain compliant with
Hey,
it.
come on
So
now.
the minute that we decide that we're going to stop being compliant with our own oppression, it breaks down. Please continue.
No, so I want to pick it, period. And so, like, what you've already talked about this, but what are some of the specific work that you've been doing
Mm-hmm.
around land ownership and housing issues?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's interesting that I haven't gotten to delve into, but it's a huge area. There's so many huge areas. Is actually around land justice when it comes to agriculture. So, part of my background working in community food systems,
Mm-hmm.
and that's actually where my land justice perspective is developed. My background is in architecture and planning and community design and planning. And really, that was how I began to look at, wait, what are these structural things that are going on and who has access to all of these different resources? Who has access to different kinds of communities? And how do you invest and provide support for communities of color, for low income communities to build the things that they need for themselves, not to have to rely on other people to come in and parachute in and build it for us, but not
Mm-hmm.
really ever for us.
Yeah.
Um, and when you look at agriculture, there are some folks who are doing really tremendous work around Black land loss, the
Mm-hmm.
history of Black land loss, especially in agriculture. Oh my gosh! I just the so there are statistics that talk about at the beginning of the 20th
Yes,
century,
the number of
like
land.
black
Yes.
black farmers owned 14%
Mm-hmm.
of agricultural land, and now I
It's
think
like
it's down to like 1 or
1 or 2%. Yeah.
2%. Um, I mean, there's a whole history of cases of how the USDA actually, on WAMU a couple of days earlier this week. What is the name of that show? I feel like it's called Replay or Research or Release or something. I'm not gonna remember it, but there was a show that was about this couple, the Wises, this farmer, this couple of farmers,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they're located in North Carolina, and the story of what they went through with the USDA around the discrimination that took away the land that these people were building and deeply investing in for their ranching. And oh man, if you find the
It
name of
looks
the show,
like Losing Ground. Reveal.
Reveal, thank you. That's what
Okay.
it is. Reveal, the losing ground segment that they just did earlier this week. Powerful, powerful segment around how structural discrimination in agricultural land and
Mm-hmm.
in agricultural programs. In, I mean, I had to stop halfway through that show, honestly, because just reading about it again, and I work with this network of Black farmers and food justice advocates who publicized when the Wises were going through this
Mm-hmm.
in 2014, and I remember the story of how these folks were just losing their land, and then hearing the details of how that actually happened. I mean, it's a repeat of all this stuff that we were just talking about in this
Yeah.
history. But so there are folks who are really bringing those stories to light, doing work around recovering and preserving, maintaining Black land, doing organizing around cooperatives,
Mm-hmm.
and again, cooperative agriculture, cooperative land ownership, cooperative housing, like and cooperative and understanding actually the history of cooperatives. There's a great book called Collective Courage, which talks about the role of African Americans in the cooperative movement and all the different ways that we've used cooperatives to build out structures that we needed that don't even get acknowledged, like and other people of color as well.
I'm
So
so-
yeah, so there are all these
I'm
tools.
sorry. I just stared at you like I'm sorry. I've
So,
been
but this is the thing too. I mean, you want to talk about history obscured. We're not just obscuring the history of what's been stolen from us. We're obscuring the history of what we've built.
yes.
So again, reinforcing that idea that we're imposters who can't do stuff
You better come on now.
because you take away the history of what we have actually built and contributed.
Ooh, God damn it. Look, Brendan. Look, I'm gonna kick some shit over. We got to wrap this shit up. I can't. I can't. I'm getting tight. I'm getting tight. You know how I am.
I do, I do, I
I
do. All
just, I
right,
can't take so much. Ah! Okay. All right.
all right,
I'm good.
okay.
Brandy, you are my esteemed colleague. You're my esteemed colleague. And no, but I really wanted to have you, and I'm pretty confident as the way I'm looking at you that you get the message that you coming back on this here show,
Oh, I would love to.
on this
I
here
would love
program,
to. Yes.
trash ass podcast of mine. It's just I just say that because I just get on here and be talking crazy mostly, but I try to be serious.
Now, stop. Now, I want
Huh?
you to hold up right there because
Okay.
you don't get on here and talk crazy. You
Thank
get on
you.
here and you bring guests who are delving into these critical things that aren't being talked about. So stop playing imposter over here
All right.
yourself and claim your brilliance.
I like
Okay?
that. All right.
Okay?
All right.
Okay?
Yeah, so this podcast is not trash, and I'm dope, and I bring
That's
on
correct.
dope fucking people to come on here and talk
Thank you
about all
very
this
much.
stuff. So, now I have a sister fish question.
Ooh.
Um, are you gonna run again? Are you gonna run?
so so I ran for Montgomery County Council at Large in the 2018 Democratic primary. 33 people in a primary. Let's
Yeah,
never do that
man, all
again.
them
So crazy.
fools. It was like a
It was like we looked at the Republican primary of 2016 and
oh
we were like,
yeah. You're like
let's do that but twice as much. I
yeah, and
don't
it's like
know. I don't know
no,
why
let's
we thought
not
that
do
was a good
that.
idea.
No.
But yeah, so I did run, did amazing well, first time candidate,
Yep.
grassroots candidate.
Yep.
We placed sixth on election day and kind of like seventh overall just by like 240 votes with my running partner, Chris Wilhelm, who was a great person to collaborate with as we both shared this really amazing vision for Montgomery County. And the hilarious thing about running for office is that the primary was on June 26, 2018. I
Hmm.
don't think that day was done. I don't think we were finished watching election results. But we were sort of seeing where we placed. And people were like, "So are you going to run again?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I haven't slept in a month. I'll tell you after I go to sleep."
Well,
So no,
okay.
I say that because it's a joke. It makes me laugh, but it also is really affirming because I am so excited that so many people were excited about the things that we were talking about in terms of like justice for everyone in Montgomery County and really creating a Montgomery for all. That folks are like, when are we going to do this again? So the answer is yes. I am intending to run again in 2022 for the county council.
That's what I'm gonna kick something over before I get out of here.
Because I'm really excited to keep building on the organizing work we've been doing. So since my run, I'm continuing to work with community members on housing issues, on racial equity issues, on environmental justice issues. Um, because I don't want us to, one of the things I believe, and I said this during the election, it's not just what happens at the election, it's everything that happens in between. And I said that, win or lose, it's about how we keep organizing for the things that we need to see happen in our community. And I'm excited that there was so much energy in that 2018 election that people are still amped up and are like, okay, what are we going to go on next? Where are we going to throw down? And so, I'm excited to keep throwing down with other county residents on issues like these. Now that I'm here, that I'm resident of Tacoma Park, being able to work with the mayor and the council around what it looks like for us to bring true housing and economic justice to Tacoma Park, being able to work on what it looks like for us to bring a truly green, like a just and sustainable Green New Deal to Montgomery County. Um, what it looks like for us to, so much of this too ties into generational justice.
Yes.
So my niece, she's 5 years old. She just started kindergarten this year. She lives here in Montgomery County. My nephew lives in Virginia. My youngest nephew lives in Virginia. My other nephew lives in Florida. When I think about the world that we're about to leave these young people, no generation has made a decision to just punt on its children like we have. And thankfully, because they've got more sense than we do, young people in this county are rising up. We see our high schoolers, our middle schoolers organizing. We see our young adults organizing. Um, and look, it is just our responsibility to deal with this stuff so we are not handing over a broke and busted and unlivable and unjust world to our children. We cannot hand a world. I mean, I do fear that we might already be past this, but
Yeah.
we cannot just double down on the things that create climate change and
No, we
hand that to
can't.
our children to deal with because we were busy being greedy and rapacious and we didn't care. And I'm sorry, if you're one of those folks who thinks that you are somehow going to be able to protect your kids
No, you won't.
with your wealth and your secure geography, I'm sorry. Mother Earth is badder than you.
Yeah, she is.
And she's going to come for all of us.
Yeah.
And you will not be able to guarantee your safety.
Can't throw money at a tsunami, bro. Yeah, I mean that's literally like the reasons that I started this podcast was really because I specifically for people like us, like black folks, but also people of color too, knew that there are there are people who are here to do the work, who we've been doing the work.
Yep.
A lot of one of the guests that I had on my first episode actually, or second episode, was talking to this man named Ibrahima, who really brought with him the teachings of the Dogon people of Mali and their belief system about farming.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the guests that I've had, a lot of the knowledge and things that they've imparted on me really point to the fact that we as descendants of African slaves, and not even just descendants of African slaves, descendants of Africans, are the stewards of this earth. We were the first people. We knew how to farm and till the land. We were in touch with the earth.
That's why we got stolen to come over here.
Yeah.
Because we had skills and knowledge.
And to clarify and correct what I said about being slaves, like we were not slaves. We were farmers, we were engineers, we were priests, we were kings, we were soldiers. We were not slaves. So we have to dispel that myth. It is like, get that out of here. That's not who we were. And the point of this podcast is to show and to remind us all that this is why we're here, that we are here to be stewards of our earth. We are here to be not just stewards of or hugging the block. This is not about that. This is about actual land ownership. It's just like Jay-Z said, He's like, are you really going to worry about like this place where your mom rents, or are you actually going to try to own the
Mhm.
neighborhood?
Mhm.
And that was free game.
Mhm.
So we have to talk about these things. I'm so glad that I had you here with me
Thank
to
you.
talk about it. It was a lot of information and very heavy, and I very much so appreciate it. We didn't even do like the giving flowers. I didn't even do that. I forgot all about it. And that's a new segment I'm supposed to be doing and forgot about it. And I guess I should just give my flowers to you, girl. But but God, Jesus, I forgot. We just went on this roll, and I was like, let's do this shit. Let's do this. And didn't even stop to say, we're supposed to be giving flowers. But anyway, well, I guess while we're here,
Let's give some
do
flowers.
you have some flowers to give?
Yes. Let's see. So I always got to give flowers to my mommy.
Hmm.
Because there's so much that I like. So much of what I do is rooted in my faith, is rooted in the way that I think about like the history of my family through her family, um, and like the land that our family owned in North Carolina, and the way that our family followed that great migration from North Carolina to DC. Um, there's so much perseverance that she taught me, so I always got to give my mom flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also did the folks. It has to be live folks, right?
What? Who?
People I give flowers to.
They no.
Oh.
They can be. It can be anyone that you want to.
So two other people I want to give flowers to. I want to give flowers to Stacey Abrams.
Come
Just
on.
I want to give her a big bouquet of flowers because whew, just whatever that woman does, I want to
I
roll
want to be
around the
all a
country
part
and
of it.
follow it.
Yeah, me too.
Just I really do.
Hang out
Um,
with her.
and I was a little sad that she didn't run for president this year, because I would have literally left my life to go make that
Probably,
happen.
yeah.
But so I will take that as the Lord was like, no, you've still
Not
got
right
things to do
now.
here.
Mhm.
You can
Not
leave your
yet.
life in a second. So big flowers to her, and then I also want to name Shirley Sherrod, who used to be at the USDA under Obama, who got
Yes, I've heard
uh,
of. Yes, keep going.
who was asked to resign under terrible, spurious circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
but who is a warrior when it comes to Black land and Black agriculture, and is building this amazing project in Georgia. That like one of my life goals is to get to go down and actually see what she's building there, around what it looks like. And again, in partner, she's one of so many people, so many amazing farmers and activists who are working on Black land issues. But I just want to give some props to her because I think it's easy to forget, like the news cycle moves on.
Mm-hmm.
One, the injustice of a Black woman with a deep history of farming being booted from the USDA for, I'm sorry, have we looked around our country? Have we looked around at the things people say? We have a delegate in the Maryland General Assembly who gave a name to Prince George's County and is still a sitting representative. And Shirley Sherrod gets booted from the federal administration for basically Project Veritas telling like a half story about a thing that she was talking about the real feelings that she has as a Black woman, sometimes dealing with white people. And mind you, her story wasn't about like white people are terrible.
No.
It was actually about I came to a healing to understand this person as a person. But no, if you take a slice of that and you cut it out, and then other people decide to judge you on that and to take your words and decide that that erases all of who you are and all your expertise. But again, people can people can lay down racial slurs and then still keep their jobs. No, no, that no. So she also gets a giant bouquet of
I
flowers.
mean, Justin Trudeau, that boy in Canada, that man dressed up like Aladdin. eh,
Okay,
like
so I gotta just say
like
this.
just
Like,
Aladdin.
what? I mean, I know why, because we have a history that says it's okay to dress up in
To
black and
put
brown face, but
ash on
just
yourself
like
and go out in public
it's
like a
just like
dumbass.
I don't understand how so many people decided that was a good idea in so many different places. and how so many of them rose to public office. Just, just, just.
Oh, girl. And if the
Hashtag things that have never occurred to me.
I've never, like, I can tell you, I've never in the history of my black days on this planet have ever thought to myself, you know what's going to be a good idea, girl? I'm going to put chalk all over myself and call myself Becky Sue and try to get a job. Never. I've never in the history of ever
Yeah.
done no shit like that. It just, okay. I just wanted to, the boy, he appeared looking like cured bacon. Anyway, it's fine. It's fine. We're done. All right, moving on. Moving on. Flowers. You know what? Because I've been in a real fighting mood. I'm actually gonna give my flowers to Shirley Chisholm.
Ooh, always.
Because Shirley always had a word for the girls, and I admire her courage and her tenacity to be the first woman. Let's put that out, because I know when Hillams, when she ran, she was talking about, no, it's not true, sis. You're not first. I hate to. You're the first to win, the nomination and so on and so forth. But you were not the first. That goes to Shirley Chisholm. And one of her quotes that I love is, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair." And that is one of the credos that I'm working every day to live up to feel that I'm always at all times good enough, that I deserve to be in every single room that I put my feet in. So that's my flower bringing today.
Nice.
I'm giving them to
and I'm naming that. I'm gonna bring like one of those nice relaxed camp chairs. It's got my cup holders. It's got like a little recliner thing. Cause look, folding chairs are uncomfortable. I'm gonna set myself right in at that table.
Right.
And be super comfortable, because that's what I deserve to be.
That's right. And if you would like a beer cozy to sit your whatever your beer of choice is, my family has an affinity for Coors Light, which
it will not be Coors Light.
It's fine.
Okay,
no, most folks, it's fine. I love my family. It's fine. It's just everybody got their thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, Brandy, I am again like very very grateful for you taking the time out to be here with me. We are definitely going to have a continuation of this discussion, and probably more in the future.
Yeah.
How can people reach you if they want? If not, is there a central location that they can visit, like a website, anything?
Sure. So the number one way people can reach me, and you can find me on social media at Brandy Formoco, Brandy, the number 4, MOCO. That's also where you can find me on Facebook, my public page on Facebook. And yeah, I really love engaging in dialogue with folks on these issues. I work with organizers here locally, but also I do training nationally across the country. And I'm actually really excited. This is something that I'm newly saying to folks more, but this year I started my own consulting firm, Radical Solutions, and a lot of what I do is organizing training, is consulting on these kind of projects where we're trying to dig deep into equity, is coaching and developing and mentoring leaders who want to be working on these issues too. So I'm really excited to be able to partner with more people and organizations around doing this kind of work here in this region and again across the nation.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. Congrats. That is a very huge accomplishment.
It's really exciting, and it's funny, you and I were talking, and I think it's part of this imposter syndrome. There's been this great article that's been circling around Facebook that I think I posted, that was like how imposter syndrome is really just a name for like basically class oppression and how it tells us that we're less than.
Come on now.
And so we all need to be like, no, this is not like some medical term or some like mental health issue. This is class oppression.
Yes.
This is like racial oppression. This is gender oppression, basically being laid all over us and us responding to it. So I'm seeking to break out of some of those oppressions by actually naming the things that I'm doing and building, as opposed to being like, well, let me keep this quiet until it's perfect or until I, quote, have something to show for it.
No.
I'm already doing this work. I've been doing this work. And I'm really excited. Yes, you were the first place where I'm actually publicly sharing, Radical Solutions.
Ooh.
And so that for the email, you can reach me at radicalsolutionsnow@gmail.com if you want to get in touch about some of these ways that we can partner through my consulting firm. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that too.
You are welcome. This is like a Crossroads exclusive.
It
Oh my
is.
God. Ooh, I gotta remember this. Yeah. Ooh, girl. Um, sorry, awkward pause. So I had like five thoughts and I just stared. Yeah, we've been doing this pretty much all the
I
entire
know,
night.
but
I've
it's
just
been
been like,
so fun. It's been so fun.
but thank you again. Radical Solutions is going to be a blessing. And
Thank
I'm just gonna do this. So, you know, when you told me about this,
you.
you were hesitant, but you still expressed it.
Hmm.
And I'm so glad that here again,
Thank
you're
you.
actually not, that hesitance is gone and that you
Yeah.
said it very clearly, like speaking truth to power.
Thank you.
And this is going to be successful
Hmm.
because anything that you put your mind to, you are successful at.
Thank you.
And I want you to hear that. I want the audience to hear that I'm speaking that to you because it's the truth. So thank you everybody again for joining me for another episode. I know it was a long one, a long notes from the field episode, but I had to make this happen because Brandy is a wealth of knowledge. She has years of experience with training and developing, and it's just very important to have her voice uplifted. So, thank you all again for joining me. Thank you, Brandy,
Thank you,
again.
Rashida. Thank you for creating this platform. Thank you for all that you are doing to just uplift so many amazing issues and people who are working on these things. Thank you for your boldness because I know that this is like you getting this started. This was a risk for you
It
and like
was.
exciting. So I'm just so excited that you were like living into this and that you've just gotten to interview so many dope people.
I
Thank you for
really
including me in that pantheon of dopeness. I really appreciate
have.
it.
Now, damn it, pantheon of dopeness, girl. Oh, how many titles does this episode have?
I
Like
don't know.
six? Sheesh. Oh my. That's it. That's enough. Bye, everybody.